Welcome back. So we're just going to finish up with Morse Coffin Sand Creek account. So if you didn't see parts 1 or 2, those will be linked in the comments on this video here. So make sure you watch both of those videos. So if you need to pause this and go watch those first, we're going to just be reading through, and we've been learning from what Morse Coffin experienced at Sand Creek. And it's he wrote about this in 1879 in letters he wrote to the Colorado Sun newspaper. And it's information that he gathered from other soldiers that were at Sand Creek, plus what he witnessed himself. So he wrote about that. It was eventually published in a book, and we're going to be reading from that book today, The Battle of Sand Creek by Morse Coffin. So we're just going to get right into it. And again, thank you for watching. If you enjoy these videos, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and comment below what you think about Morse Coffin, and go ahead, hit that notification bell so when we post new videos, you get an alert when we post those. So go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell for us. And we're going to get right into Morse Coffin's book, and we're going to finish up with his account on Sand Creek. At evening, when our dead were all gathered and laid in a row, I viewed them and recalled to mind my thoughts at the time. There were either 8 or 9 bodies, am not sure, but think the latter number. I have no copy of the official reports of the battle, though such would, I find, be very useful. It was rather a hard sight to those who were unused to war and its accompanying horrors. I then fully realized that our battle had been dearly won, for the lives of these 9 men were of more real value to our country than all the Indians on the plains. Beside our dead, we had 38 wounded, to attend whom kept the surgeons and numerous assistants very busy. The wounded occupied many of the Indian lodges, and to make them more comfortable, many of the buffalo robes found in the village were utilized. During the morning, most of the Indian stock to be had was gathered and herded by the Mexicans on the bluff south of the village, and about midday we started for Fort Lyon. I believe the number was between 500 and 600. Later in the day, many others were picked up, but these were kept with the command and mostly used by the boys, in place of their jaded and nearly used-up horses. The 2 nights the command passed on the battleground were dismal in the extreme. The camp was in the form of a hollow square. Our first night's experience was as follows. We slept the sleep of tired men, who were thankful for the blessed privilege of laying themselves down and closing their eyes in sleep. Refreshing, health-giving, life-renewing sleep. Probably 100 or 2 Indian dogs were scattered over the plains and making the night hideous for their dismal, wailing cry. It was indeed like a night among the wolves. Sometime in the night the pickets fired their guns and came running in, when the whole camp was aroused. Our portion of the square was first saluted with 3rd Battalion, turn out, from Major Cree, and the next moment the clear ring of Captain Nichols' voice calling, Company D, turn out. And as the boys raised up, many repeated the call for the benefit of comrades not yet aroused, and then the Major's and the Captain's call to fall in 3rd Battalion, fall in Company D, and the like of this going on throughout the camp, made a confusion not readily described. And the men suddenly awakened, and a little confused for an instant, and likely each one thinking the camp was attacked, and many of those but half awake, calling, Where are you falling in? And the reply, This way, I cannot describe it. There is no telling the result of a sudden and determined attack of even 100 Indians at such a time. At any rate, I should prefer not to be present when it happened. The result of all this was that a skirmish line, composed of every 4th man, was advanced several rods around camp, when all again returned to their blankets. I believe the pickets were supposed to have fired at Indians, but just what the circumstances were I cannot remember. But there were other evidences showing some of the enemy were around during the night. There was quite a scene created next forenoon by the killing of a soldier, a Mexican, who was said to be on picket duty, and who left his post and went after a herd of Indian stock some distance away. The whole thing was witnessed by Greenlee, Hopkins, Hank, Farrar, Hess, and Frank Smith and Lockhart of Company D, and was about as follows. When the boys were out several miles from camp, they saw 6 or 8 Indians approach over a ridge, but who, on seeing the boys dismount to receive them, turned off at an angle and made at once for the Mexican, placing themselves between the latter and our boys, who pushed their horses to their utmost to save the fellow, but who led away in a direction which made assistance impossible. The Mexican took several deliberate shots as the enemy approached him, but seemingly without effect. Then he dropped or threw away his gun and endeavored to escape. 2 of the enemy, one on either side, came up very near, and one of them shot an arrow in the man's neck, which the boys could see as he ran. Then one of the Indians took several shots with a revolver, but with no apparent effect, when the other knocked him from his horse with a hatchet or similar weapon and killed him. The boys were in time to prevent his being scalped, and also to wound, if not kill, one of the Indians, who had to be assisted away. The Indians secured the horse and saddle. Sometime during the day a soldier of some company of the Third rode out on the plain alone, and not being seen or heard of afterward was no doubt cut off and killed, but so far as I know there was no special effort made to find his body. In the afternoon Sergeant Maury, Williams, and myself obtained leave to take a look over the battle ground. As we went up the creek quite a company of the officers and John Smith were returning from a similar visit, one object thereof being, as reported, the identification of the bodies of several chiefs by Smith. Besides looking, we also counted the dead, or rather I counted while the others assisted in finding the bodies. We did not go far enough up the creek to see all the dead in that direction, not even as far up as where Maxwell was killed, and where the boys reported 5 of the enemy killed, while far above this Sergeant Bloor, with 10 or a dozen men, had killed 3 or 4 Indians. I believe the latter party were farther up the creek than any other soldiers during the day of the battle, and so I feel reasonably certain that we have an account of nearly all the dead up that way. In one place, way up the creek, in a space of about 20 or 30 feet square lay, if I am not mistaken, 23 dead warriors, not a woman or child among or near them. One of these, said to be a chief, was sprinkled all over from head to foot with some sort of a yellow powder, and some of the boys who saw the bodies the day before said the powdering had been done since that time. The heart was cut out of one of the bodies and stuck in a bush near by. This was believed to be in retaliation of the mutilation of McFarland's body, whose heart was at first believed to have been cut out, but later the surgeons found it all right. At the clump of bushes where I had watched the enemy so long, we found no warrior, but only a dead squaw and child. The warrior, which I believed we killed while crawling away from the place, was already scalped, so I was saved that trouble. Along the east bank of the creek, where some of the first fighting took place, but few dead Indians were found. Some were scattered along the bed of the creek on the sand, while most were along the west bank and in the rifle pits, though here were no such numbers as one not counting would naturally have expected to find. 1 or 2 medicine men must have been shot in the pits, as the contents of medicine bags were scattered about very freely. For myself, I confess to having experienced something of pity for the dead of the class, said to be held in high esteem among all Indian tribes, but whether or not they are, as among people more civilized, non-combatants, I am uninformed. The body of White Antelope, a prominent Cheyenne chief, lay in the bed of the creek, opposite the village, and was among the first Indians killed. My own opinion on viewing him was that he must have been rather a superior Indian, certain above the average in moral and intellectual endowments. The number of dead we made out to be 116 or 118, of all sorts, warriors, squaws, and children, as we counted neither separately, and it was my opinion, and as I remember, that also of my companions, think we agreed as to it, that about 2/3 of all were warriors, and 1/3 women and children. To make the number of 116 or 118, we included the dead I knew to be on the bluff, the one who killed McFarland, and 5 near where Maxwell was shot. From information recently obtained, I must add 3 or 4 killed far up the creek by Bloor's squad, and the 3 killed below the village by Old Man Ottoby, Pixley, and the other 2 soldiers. This makes a total which I am satisfied were killed of the enemy of 122 to 125. Now I am not to be misunderstood in this matter, for I am not claiming there were no more in numbers killed of the enemy than above indicated, but my object is to come as near concerning this question as possible by stating where these dead were. I am well satisfied some more were killed, but just where or how many I have been unable to learn, and for the reason I have not seen the parties who knew. At the time of the battle, it was currently reported, and I believe it, that a company of the First charged on some Indians in some valley or ravine to the west of the creek with sabers, but the enemy either made it too hot for them or they could not get their horses near enough to them to use sabers, and so drew off after making a charge or two and took it afoot. No doubt some, probably many, were killed here, but no one I have communicated with lately on this subject has known anything in particular about it, though nearly all had heard of it. No doubt most any officer or even soldier of the First Colorado could give information concerning this locality under consideration. But making a liberal allowance for the number killed in this unknown locality, I have nothing tangible on which to base a belief that over 175 of the Indian were killed in this battle, nor can I say I believe there were the latter number. There may have been 200 or even 450, as some say they counted of warriors alone. I don't say they did not, for I don't know, but I would like to know where they were. I am not ignorant of the fact that the number killed at Sand Creek are generally estimated at from 400 to 600, but I think myself justified in rejecting any such estimate. For am I ignorant of the fact that 2 men have, as stated in Chivington's synopsis of the Sand Creek investigation, sworn to the fact that they counted 450 warriors dead on the field, and one of these men is a leading citizen of our state, and one for whom, in common with the people of Colorado in general, the writer entertains a high regard. The other man who so testified, or apparently so, held a commission in a Colorado regiment, and with whom the writer has had some acquaintance, and who seemed to be a very good man. I expect to be antagonized in this matter. I will conclude this Sand Creek subject next week. A few words more about this number killed. It is just possible my estimate is too low, as the enemy may have carried away 100 or more dead bodies during the night for aught I know, as I have no doubt there were plenty of live ones hanging around to have accomplished this by working industriously. But then how did these other men count so many? As I believe we all looked over the field the same day, that is, the day after the fight, it would not have been safe for any small party to traverse the battleground after the close of the battle and before dark, and I am safe in saying no party did this. But if 400 or 500 were killed in this battle, I would be very glad indeed to learn the fact, and correct the error here made. For if any glory attaches to war, there is more resulting from having participated in a big than a small fight. I lately heard in an indirect way that party of the enemy were killed off somewhere early in the day by a party of 18 men, and in my opinion it is about correct, though I have been unable to learn anything reliable concerning it. It is quite likely this is the same affair in which some of the first regiment were engaged, mentioned in my last letter, though I may be wrong in this. Now about the white flag so much talked about by the opponents of the fight. I am not unmindful of the fact that the testimony of 100 or 200 men even, who did not see such a flag displayed at the Sand Creek village, is no positive proof that none was exhibited, but it does tend to make it improbable except the fact be proven by reliable witnesses. I am not aware that a white flag at Sand Creek was ever heard of until the one-sided investigations of those old convoys, the Committee on the Conduct of the War, took place in Colorado in the summer of 1865, nor do I now know on whose evidence it rests, though most likely on that of the truthful and impartial John Smith. I will add that I have never seen or heard of anything, either in conversations with comrades or otherwise, at the time of the battle or since, which even made it appear to me probable that any white or truce flag was exhibited by any one at the above named battle. Now, as to the scalping part of the story, one witness who looked over the ground and says he counted 450 warriors says he has seen the white Lipan or Comanche Indians scalp their own dead to avoid having them scalped by the whites, which may account for some of the Indians being scalped at Sand Creek. Well, that is mild, surely. I cannot say the latter was not the case in some instances at Sand Creek, but it appears to me too improbable, after what I know, to even merit consideration. On looking over the field, I did not see a solitary warrior not scalped, or which I did not believe was. By scalped, I mean simply a portion of the scalp and hair taken off, not the whole of it. I noticed about the scalping in particular, for, to tell the truth, I was prepared to remove any Indian's top not found intact. I know this is not to the credit of myself and others who did it, but it is the truth, and I am disposed to shoulder my share of it. At that time it was deemed all right and proper, and I may as well add that on the return trip to Denver, those trophies were rated at an average value of $10 each among the boys. I do not say all were scalped, but I do say that I have heard of but one not scalped, one warrior, and that is the Indian who killed McFarland. His was not taken. There may have been many more, but if so, the writer did not see or hear of it. I believe one of our dead was scalped, and evidently the one who did that was in such haste to get away that he dropped it, and it was found close by. The fact was, our men were nearly all killed where the enemy could not safely get to them, or where they had no time to spare for it. I think very little of the generalship displayed in the planning of the attack, if indeed there was any plan about it. The battle might and should have been so planned as to have prevented so many escaping entirely, and also to have kept them from reaching the high abrupt banks of the creek. In fact, it has always been my belief that many more Indians should have been killed, with the loss our side sustained, or else the number we did kill should have been accomplished with much less loss than we met with. I know some of the women and children could have been saved, and it is clear to my mind that many might have been, had it been the desire of the commander, but this was no part of the plan. This thing was no more in favor with me at this time than a month or two earlier at Buffalo Springs. Many of the Indians killed had lariats or something with which to catch and ride a pony, and had not their stock been south of the village, where the troops gobbled them up in a start, no doubt many more would have escaped. John Smith stated that a squaw first heard the clatter of the approach, but it was believed to be either their own stock or wild game, so no general alarm ensued them until the soldiers came in sight. Another account was through squaws who straggled in at Colonel Bent's, which was to the effect that an Indian heard the din and, putting his ear to the ground for an instant, jumped up, and soldiers, there was an instant scattering. I will correct a slight error made in my last letter in regard to one of the men killed the day after the battle. The man was John Wells of Captain Baxter's company, and instead of going out alone, three went together, but this man started in before the others, or at least separated from them, and was killed. One of the two companions of Wells, William Davenport, is now living at Pueblo. These facts were gathered by a friend from Abraham Cronk, who was a member of Captain Baxter's company. The night of the 30th, the transportation arrived from Fort Lyon, which for several reasons gave joy to all. The train now numbered 115 wagons. It seemed as soon as the troops started for Sand Creek, Lieutenant Pinnock proceeded at once to prepare for the start next morning by loading many of the wagons, maybe 30 or 40 of them, with forage, provisions, and ammunition at the fort. This and other preparations kept them busy about all night. At their first camp, the lieutenant received order from the battalion. At their first camp, the lieutenant received the order from the battlefield for ammunition when selecting two of the best four-horse teams, loaded them lightly, and started them ahead safely. Our second night's experience on the battleground was a literal repetition of the first, the whole camp being aroused, except on this occasion we had, in addition to the music of the dogs, that of a couple of hundred mules. On the morning of December 1st, the whole command started on the back track and went about 15 miles toward Fort Lyon, where we camped for the night. The next morning our dead and wounded were taken on to the fort, in charge of Major Anthony, while the main force continued down Sand Creek to its junction with the Arkansas, about 15 or 20 miles below Lyon. The morning we left the old camp at the battleground, about a mile or so, we saw one or two squaws and two or three children huddled in the grass by the side of the trail. They appeared sad and lonely enough to excite pity in all but the hard-hearted. Jim Du Bois says they were left by the roadside with some considerable rations. The intention was to have taken them to Fort Lyon, but after it was decided to pursue Little Raven's band, it was deemed better to leave them where they would be more likely to meet with assistance from their own race than to be dropped somewhere else to starve. When I passed them, the squaws were entreating the teamsters to be taken back on the wagons. This party was soon afterward killed by those who brought up the rear, and who remained behind for the purpose of destroying everything which might be of service to the enemy. I will now in a general way have my say in regard to this Sand Creek affair, though for the lack of some necessary documents and inability to spare the required time, not to mention an additional reason, am unable to do justice to the subject. This battle is usually, especially in the East, referred to as the Sand Creek Massacre or Shivington's Massacre, and as such has it gone forth to the world, and as such is it likely to be handed down to posterity. I think this is unjust. It merits no such infamous brand. If this was a massacre and not a battle, in the ordinary sense of the word, then am I at a loss to know just what constitutes a battle, and I wish to be absent from all battles. Many who were in this fight had seen service and been in battles elsewhere, and these called this a battle, and very much of one too. For this affair the commander of the expedition had been censured, lied about, and cursed generally beyond all reason. I am no special admirer of Colonel Shivington, nor can I justify all that was done at Sand Creek, but I have a strong desire to see justice done him, as well as all others who have been and are under the ban of condemnation on account of the mistaken idea abroad in regard to the battle. In this connection, I must record my contempt for the work of the Committee on the Conduct of the War in relation to this fight. This committee consisted of Ben Wade, Doolittle, and I believe Foster. I suppose they were honest, but they were evidently imposed upon, and their so-called investigations and report have been furnished authority for most of the untruths, misconceptions, and unjust censurings connected with this affair, and which has molded popular sentiment in the East regarding Sand Creek. While Colonel Shivington seems to have had many enemies who took this opportunity of venting their spite, the grand origin of the trouble appears to have been John Smith, Indian interpreter, and Major Colley, Indian agent. As will be remembered, John Smith was in the Indian village at Sand Creek engaged in trading with the Indians at the time the fight commenced. From the testimony of Major Talbot, it appears that Smith and Colley were partners in this trading business, and that they lost in consequence of the fight 105 buffalo robes, 2 white ponies, and other goods to the value of $6,000, as estimated by them. Smith said he would realize $25,000 by his losses. They, Smith and Colley, also said they would go in person to Washington and represent the Sand Creek fight as a massacre, and they would do anything to damn Colonel Shimington or Major Downing. These men seem to have effectually accomplished their purpose of damning Shimington and Sand Creek, and this was accomplished mainly through the standing given their statements by the said committee. There is much valuable testimony relating to this subject, probably not known by the general public, in a small pamphlet called A Synopsis of the Sand Creek Investigation, compiled by Colonel Shimington in justification of his attack. This also includes orders by Major General Curtis to himself, Shimington, as commander of the District of Colorado. I had intended quoting at some length from his testimony, but cannot do so as on account of more urgent duties. I must close with this letter what I have to say on this subject. I will, however, send the above-mentioned document to the editor of the Sun for his perusal. Also a report of a council of Indian chiefs with the military and territorial authorities in Denver in September 1864, together with a scathing review by ex-Governor Evans of such portion of the report of the above-named committee as relates to himself. I will further state that while I have always believed the attack on the Sand Creek village was warranted by the facts, the Indians as a whole being decidedly hostile, it is also more than probable that several of the chiefs there killed were themselves peacefully disposed and did not merit their fate. I am strongly inclined to believe that the escape of the little command of Major Wincoops, which went to Smoky Hill, was owing to the efforts of one or two chiefs who were afterwards killed at Sand Creek. Also, Left Hand and White Antelope may not have deserved death, but some of these chiefs were unable to control to any great extent the warlike spirit of their several bands. At least this seems to have been the case. Of all others, Major Anthony, who was in command at Fort Lyon at the time, was the person to know whether or not the Indians at Sand Creek were friendly, and there is plenty of proof that he did state plainly and emphatically to Colonel Shimington and others on the day preceding the fight that they were hostile and that he should have attacked them himself before the arrival of Shimington, and if he had force enough at his disposal. Another thing, it seems that Major A remains of the same opinion in regard to this as entertained at the time of the fight, though for years he has had the credit, or rather discredit, of having changed front, and which later I had supposed to be the case, until a recent letter for him, in reply to one of inquiry from myself, makes all plain. It seems injustice has been done Major A on account of the report of that notorious committee. The Major says, had my whole statement been published instead of only garbled and mutilated extracts from it, no one would have said that my separate reports did not harmonize. The Indians attacked at Sand Creek are by many confounded with others, Arapahoes under Little Raven, who were disarmed and fed by Major A at or near Fort Lyon for some time during the summer of 1864. I quote from his recent letter. I have no objection to your using my name as authority for the statement that the Indians who were disarmed and fed by me at Fort Lyon formed no part of the band which Shimington's command fought at Sand Creek. I have not asked for or received authority to quote any other portion of Major Anthony's letter, but will venture to do so in the belief that he will excuse the liberty taken, as it is exactly pertinent to the question. The Indians that I had the honor of aiding Shimington in chastising were a portion of the same band that made the attack on Fort Larned, murdered the teamsters, and destroyed the train opposite Fort Zara, burned the train, and killed the 10 men in sight of the 2 Mexicans at Cimarron Crossing, cutting them up by pieces in sight of each other, taking out their hearts and vitals, chopping them in pieces, which were placed in a pile, the heads of the men then being cut off and placed in a circle about their fire, while the headless trunks after being disfigured in the manner that nothing but the devilish ingenuity of a Plains Indian could devise, were kicked about the prairie by the innocent, squaws and harmless, papooses. They were a portion of the same band, too, that attacked almost every train or stagecoach that attempted to pass up the Arkansas Valley during the summer of 1864, and who gave me, with a small detachment from General Blunt's command, such a thorough whipping at Pawnee Fork only a few weeks before the Sand Creek fight. Warbonnet, one of the leaders in the running fight, having been sent to this happy hunting ground from Sand Creek. In closing, I will say that there are many Sand Creek boys in Boulder County, and I have had many consultations with old comrades regarding facts recorded in these letters, and am indebted to several of them for aid in obtaining solid truth. This completes what I have to say on this subject. What I have written has been less a pleasure than what seemed to me a duty, inasmuch as others, possessed of more leisure and the necessary facts, have neglected to tell the truth in the interest of justice. If these letters shall contribute to any extent to a correct understanding of the subject treated, the object of the writer will have been attained. M. H. Coffin, Upper St. Vrain, March 9, 1879. So we get this information about Sand Creek straight from Morse Coffin, from what he saw and what others that he talked to after the battle over the years. He documented it and wrote this in 1879. In fact, Morse is one of the first to write about Sand Creek, and just 15 years later, this was published in the Colorado Sun newspaper, and no doubt he had documented this information, not long after Sand Creek. But it's important that we look at accounts from people that were there, and including Morse Coffin and Irving Halbert, and there's others we're going to read from, including George Bent. George Bent, we get a lot of information from concerning Sand Creek, and he was actually a dog soldier, also called a warrior, and he was there at Black Kettle's village, and he was one of the dog soldiers there. And he wrote letters to historians when he was working in Colony, Oklahoma, as an Indian agent, and they would ask him questions about his Cheyenne life. His Bent was half Cheyenne, and ask him questions as well about his time at Sand Creek and living as a Cheyenne warrior. And he answered these questions in letters, and we have over 400 pages of George Bent letters in our archives. So we'll be reading from those in an upcoming video as well, and learning from George Bent what he had to say about Sand Creek. So be sure to look out for those, and you won't want to miss when we upload those videos. So again, subscribe to our channel, tap that notification bell, so when we post our next videos, you get alerted to when we post those. Go ahead, leave a comment. Go ahead and make sure you look at parts 1 and 2. Those are in the comments as well. You can click on the link for those. Make sure you check out our social media. All our social media links will be in the description of this video. You can follow us on Facebook at Bowen History, follow us on X at The Lost Sand Creek, and you can also follow us here on YouTube. And make sure you check out our website, thelostsandcreek.com, and look at our blogs. And there's over 20 pages of blogs you can read on our website. And make sure you pick up our book, We Found the Lost Sand Creek Site. Look at the Buy the Book tab at the top right of any page on our website. Make sure you get our book and leave us a review and rating on Amazon. So make sure you learn more about our Sand Creek discovery and how eyewitnesses such as Morse Coffin and Irving Halbert helped find over 4,000 battle and village artifacts at the Lost Sand Creek site, and learn about how this massive Sand Creek site discovery doesn't just change the location, but changes the Sand Creek story. It's not just a location change, it's a story change. So make sure you browse our website, look at our blogs, and follow us on social media, and we'll see you in the next video.